Picture this. It's the scorching summer of 634 CE. The sun is just beating down on the dusty plains of the Levant. You've got an exhausted superpower, the mighty Byzantine Empire, and they are suddenly forced to turn their gaze south. Why? Because a newly unified, incredibly motivated force is marching right out of the Arabian Peninsula. And listen, this isn't just some minor border raid. No, this is the absolute collision of two vastly different worlds. Today, in this explainer, we are going to reconstruct the Battle of Ajnadayn, the very first major pitched battle between the rising Rashidun Caliphate and the Byzantine Empire.
Honestly, the sheer audacity of this historical moment just cannot be overstated. I mean, think about it. Just 2 years prior, the Arabian Peninsula was completely fractured by internal conflict during the Ridda Wars. Yet remarkably, fast forward to 634 CE, and they are standing toe-to-toe with the Eastern Roman Empire, literally one of the undisputed geopolitical heavyweights of latent antiquity. So how exactly did they pull this off?
To uncover that answer, we'll be looking at these empires on the brink, the commanders and armies involved, and the mystery of the battlefield itself. Then we'll dive right into the clash of Ajnadayn, its aftermath, and the fascinating history and debate surrounding the sources. Let's get into it. Part 1. Empires on the Brink, the Geopolitical Landscape. To really understand Ajnadayn, we first need to zoom out and look at the whole geopolitical chessboard of the early 7th century. The timing of this invasion, it was basically a perfect historical storm. For almost 3 decades, right up to 628 CE, the Byzantine and Sassanid Persian empires had been locked in this devastating, completely exhausting war. Now, the Byzantines won, sure, but their economy was absolutely wrecked. Plus, their local Levantine populations were super alienated by heavy taxation and all these religious schisms. Meanwhile, down in Arabia, Caliph Abu Bakr successfully reunites the entire peninsula during the Ridda Wars by 633 CE. So by the time we hit 634, you've got a depleted, severely overextended Byzantine frontier, staring down a highly unified Arabian force that is driven by both profound religious faith and, brilliant geopolitical opportunism. Part 2. Commanders and armies, a clash of doctrines. We really have to look closely at the men on the ground here, because this wasn't just two empires bumping into each other. It was a fundamental clash of military doctrines. The contrast between these two forces was just stark. On one side, you have Emperor Heraclius scrambling to assemble a Byzantine force that leaned heavily on armored cataphract cavalry and these deep, dense phalangite infantry formations. They were heavily armored, yeah, but they were also exhausted. And frankly, they were dealing with major language barriers since this was a multi-ethnic force made up of Greeks, Armenians, and local Arab Thederates. On the flip side, you have the Rashidun army, under the overall leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid. Now, they were built entirely for this harsh environment. They favored light armor, rapid spear infantry, and highly mobile light cavalry. They absolutely did not want a static pushing match, they wanted speed. But what was the actual scale of this fight? Well, if you read some of the early Islamic chronicles, take the historian al-Bakr writing in the 9th century, for example, you're going to encounter a pretty astonishing claim. He puts the Byzantine troop count at up to 100,000 men. That is a massive, massive army. However, modern military historians, like Walter Kawagi, look at that claim a bit differently. They point out that keeping 100,000 men supplied with food and water in that region at that time, logistically, impossible. Modern estimates actually suggest a much more balanced, gritty fight. We're likely looking at roughly 10 to 20,000 troops on each side. Those inflated numbers in the historical texts were actually a pretty common rhetorical tool used back then to really emphasize the miraculous nature of the victory. Part 3. Choosing the battlefield. The geographic mystery. So these two armies are marching toward each other in the blistering summer heat, but where exactly did they collide? Welcome to one of the biggest geographic mysteries in early Islamic history. Here's the crazy thing. There is absolutely no direct archaeological evidence of this battle. No mass graves, no rusted swords lying around. So historians have to play detective using just texts and topography. Now, traditional Islamic sources place the battle near Beit Jibrin in modern-day Israel. But 19th century historians actually pointed out that the nearby Wadi al-Samt, which is the ancient valley of Elah, perfectly matches the wide, flat topography you need for the massive cavalry maneuvers we're about to discuss. And just to keep things incredibly interesting, modern scholars like Moshe Sharon have hypothesized the battle might have taken place much further north, up in Jordan or southern Syria. But for our purposes, assuming that traditional southern Palestine location, let's look at the battle itself. Part 4. The Clash of Ajnadayn.
July 30, 634 CE. We are zooming right into the tactical realities now. It's late July. The oppressive summer heat in Palestine is heavily favoring the lightly armored Arab forces over that heavily burdened Byzantine infantry. This absolute meat grinder of a battle unfolds over 2 grueling days. It starts off a bit cautiously, right? You've got probing skirmishes, some archer volleys back and forth, but then the Muslims execute this classic, brilliant maneuver, the feigned retreat. They pretend to pull back, which draws the disciplined Byzantine infantry right out of their tight protective formations. And the very second those lines fracture, Khalid ibn al-Walid unleashes his highly mobile light cavalry, just devastating the Byzantine flanks. Stripped of their cohesion and completely exhausted by the summer heat, the Byzantine center eventually just collapses. But amidst all this grand tactical maneuvering, this battle was also intensely, brutally personal. According to al-Waqidi, the legendary Muslim warrior Durar ibn al-Azwar was fighting fiercely in single combat. The Byzantine commander, Vardan, often written as Warden in the texts, had actually just lost his son to Durar in combat, and Durar allegedly taunted the Byzantine commander with this chilling line, saying, "I will very soon unite Wardan with his boy before killing him as well." The loss of these commanders, it created a massive chaotic leadership vacuum in the Byzantine ranks. Now, we absolutely must not think the Byzantines just rolled over. Not at all. These were professional, hardened soldiers, and they fought incredibly hard. As the historian al-Tabari noted, the fighting was heavy and the camp of the Muslims was penetrated. The Byzantine forces pushed the Rashidun army right to the absolute brink. They nearly broke their defensive lines entirely. It was really only the superior stamina and those relentless flanking maneuvers of the Muslim cavalry that ultimately turned the tide of the entire battle. Part 5. The Aftermath. A new era in the Levant. Because once that Byzantine center broke, it triggered a massive collapse that would permanently alter world history. The immediate outcomes were just catastrophic for Rome. The surviving Byzantine forces essentially engaged in a completely disorganized, panicked retreat toward Jerusalem and the coastal cities. With the field army shattered, the entire interior of Palestine was suddenly left wide open. The Rashidun forces swiftly swept in, capturing Nablus, Lydda, and Jaffa. Crucially, they also captured the Byzantine military standards, which is a massive psychological blow for any Roman army. Emperor Heraclius quickly realized the southern Levant was totally lost, and he was forced to abandon his major base at Emesa, retreating way up north to Antioch. So why does Ajnadayn matter so much in the grand scheme of things? Because it was the first domino to fall. It was the domino that toppled the Byzantine Levant. This huge victory in July 634 opened the road directly to Damascus, which was then besieged and captured by September. It essentially set into motion this unstoppable momentum that would culminate just 2 years later at the incredibly decisive Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE, permanently ending Byzantine rule in the region. Part 6. Sources, History, and Debate. Reconstructing the past. Now, as we analyze this monumental historical event, a really vital question remains. How do we actually know all this? How do we reconstruct this history? Honestly, reconstructing this battle is like putting together an incredible academic puzzle. On one hand, we have early Islamic sources like al-Waqidi and al-Tabari. They're richly detailed, incredibly narrative-driven, and they give us all these fascinating tactical maneuvers and heroic quotes. But we have to remember they were compiled over a century later and, as we mentioned, often feature heavily exaggerated troop numbers. On the flip side, contemporary Christian accounts from Armenian and Frankish chroniclers, guys like Sebios and Fredegar, are incredibly sparse. I mean, the Byzantines left almost no official record of this battle at all, very likely due to the sheer humiliation of the defeat. So historians are left trying to match these highly detailed adversarial accounts against very brief, indirect confirmations. And because of this major source discrepancy, this history remains a living, breathing debate today. Scholars are literally still arguing over the exact, unproven location of the battle. They debate the precise chain of command. Some actually argue Amr ibn al-As was the true mastermind on the field, not Khalid. They debate the exact troop sizes, and even whether the Byzantine commander Vardan actually tried to launch a sneaky ambush during a parley, or if that was just a later literary motif added in to make the story more dramatic. History, as it turns out, is rarely a clean, fully settled story. But listen, despite all that academic friction over the tiny details, the macro reality is absolutely undeniable. The Byzantines marched out to crush what they arrogantly thought was just a minor frontier raid, and instead, they met an incredibly organized, brilliant military machine that completely shattered their empire's southern half. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought.
Considering the massive ripple effects of this single summer day in 634 CE, how drastically different would the map of the modern Near East look if that Byzantine heavy infantry had actually managed to hold their line? Think about that, and keep exploring the fascinating twilight of the Byzantine Empire.